The city has given our streets back. When I say the city, our city council, our mayor's office, and the state legislature have handcuffed police officers and given the streets back to the criminal. They demonize police officers. They've changed the rules where it's impossible to do our job, and the criminals take advantage of that.
Our elected officials are now bowing down to the Black Lives Matter movement and implementing all kinds of legislation that is really harmful to public safety.
Those are the heads of the two largest NYPD unions saying why they think crime is rising. I want to bring our guest back, former NYPD Chief of Department Philip Banks and one-time NYPD Deputy Inspector Anthony Raganella. The guys are doing their jobs as union guys, talking about it. But why do you think, Anthony, I'll start with you, why do you think we've seen the spike in crime? I've heard a lot of different reasons, but you're obviously closer to it. Why?
I don't think, Rich, that we could put our finger on one exact reason why. I think there's for lack of a better term, a perfect storm that's happened with a lot of different factors that's come into play over the last half a year or so that's facilitated what we're seeing right now. I know from my latest check of the CompStat numbers, our homicide numbers were up, I think, 24% in homicides and about 68% in shooting incidents, whereas other forms of crime are down. So it's the violent crime that we're seeing the spike in, as you pointed out. One factor that I hear time and time again is that the morale in the department is so low. The officers are hearing from their union heads and from their supervisors that they face the potential risk of not only discipline, but with these recent reforms that are out there, you could be arrested for doing your job now. So exercise your discretion as much as possible, and unless your life is in imminent danger, try not to take action. That's the information that's being fed to the cops.
Is that because of this, that everybody's got a phone? Is it that somebody doesn't want to be Pantaleo, and Pantaleo, for folks who don't remember, he was the officer in Staten Island who had a chokehold on Garner, and then he died. I mean, to be honest, the audience could say, hey, if somebody's got a knee on somebody's neck, you know, they shouldn't be doing that. So which part of it is it that guys don't want to go on calls when they would have gone on the same call a year ago? So
before I answer that, the other issue is that from all the anti-police rhetoric that's been going on, and I'm of the opinion, and I've had this conversation with Phil in the past, I believe, he can answer as to whether he agrees or not, but I think what we're seeing with the anti-police rhetoric is that it's a very small minority of people that feel this way, yet the mainstream media is putting such a spotlight on it that it's giving the impression that all cops are bad and everybody feels that way about cops. I don't necessarily believe that. But as perpetrators are hearing the news and talking to their friends and their co-conspirators on the street and hearing this rhetoric, they're feeling emboldened, and they're seeing the reforms that are being put in place. They are feeling emboldened and brazen enough to go out and do the things that we're seeing right now, and that's a problem.
I'll show you the scene. We saw it really briefly. The guy who had your old job, Monahan, was on a bridge, and if you notice, somebody reached right over with a pole or stick or something and hit him pretty good, bleeding obviously. He needed stitches, I understand it. The same question as to why, but I gotta say, I'm not sure it's a tiny fraction of the people who think there's a problem. We keep coming back to that national poll, which showed that people believe there's two different, a majority of this population, depending on the color of your skin, that there is a problem, whether it's systemic or not, but there's a racial component to policing. To your end, I think he said it perfect. There's a perfect storm right now. You got COVID going on. You got the protests going on. You got a lot of economic insecurity going on. It's hot as hell. Why do you put, I mean, these are real big spikes here. This isn't some marginal in one city or another. We're seeing this in every major metropolitan area seemingly in the country.
You know, and I agree
Rich, can I just interrupt for 1 second before Phil answers? To have a meaningful conversation about what we're talking about right now, and Phil may even bring this up, can we define, when you speak of systemic racism?
I don't even know what it means.
to have a meaningful conversation about it and to look at the polls, do we believe that there's systemic racism? Well, what is systemic racism?
I can tell you a little bit only because as a talking head in this chair, we do this. It's referenced that it is permeated throughout policing that depending on the color of your skin, you should expect different treatment. The degree of which I think is totally up for interpretation. But the idea that if he and you got pulled over, he'd get treated different than you. Now, you may not agree with that, and maybe the majority of police officers don't, but that is the general definition, I think, fairly when people say systemic. Depending on your color, there's a different relationship you're going to have with the cops.
That's the baseline, and I love to debate him. That's the baseline. But the question is this: if I was just concerned with my son being pulled over and a police officer being nasty to him, that's not the issue. I mean, that's something we don't like. We have judges who have had people in front of their court, and one person that looked like me and one person looked like Tony with the same background, and they had a complete different sentence. We have people in jail who, because they can't afford bail. So when you say systemic racism, and I'll be very clear about this, there's nobody at a table saying, let's take a look at this because we want to suppress people of color. That's not what it is. But it's having a disparate impact. It's actually a poverty issue that's manifested as racism. If my son cannot afford a $500 bail in New York State, he will sit in jail longer than the time in which he would have been sentenced if he was convicted. And if somebody else's family can pay for the bail, then he's out. And statistics show that when you're fighting your case with your prosecutors, right, out of jail, you have much more leverage when you're sitting in jail. So take that young man of color who's in Rikers Island or any other facility, and he's waiting for his trial to take place. And the trial is delayed, and the trial is delayed, and the trial is delayed. But Anthony's son is sitting at home. My son is sitting in jail, and he's dealing with the abuse of just the mental anguish being in prison, and then maybe the fights that he's getting into. So who's more apt to accept that plea deal? And it is done purposely. Now, I'm not saying that it's done because you're black or white, but when you pull that poverty level down, and a certain percentage of the people there are poverty, see, don't get misguided on there's a police officer who's rude or not rude. I've seen officers be rude to blacks just as he should have been rude to. Those are just rude officers. And that's why I say the system is not about the individual actions of the police officers riding around. It's a system that's in place that suppresses people. But I'd like to bring up another point, and I thought it was a very good point, and I agree with Anthony to a great degree. But these protesters, this is not about anti-police. This is the manifestation about being anti-police. But these are people who have a problem with the racism that's taking place in housing. There's place in economic opportunities. It's just that law enforcement is the only government that lives in a neighborhood with you. They're your neighbors. You see them every day. So it is very unfair to them, but they are borning the brunt of people being upset with a system that's taking place. You have a lot of protesters out there.
But you know what, Phil? There's this thing going around with young people. All cops are bad. There's a thing going around called all cops are bad. And I've heard, and I said, what the hell are you talking about? They don't even know why they feel that way. They have never even had a bad experience with the cops. That's going around there too. Is this more than just socioeconomic, which has been going around forever, okay? That there's have and have-nots in this country, and more often communities of color, bear the brunt of it. But something different's going on now?
I think that the media has a large part to blame in that, Richard. I think what happens.
It's always come back to us. Yeah, go ahead.
And I went down to New Orleans, and I went to a journalist convention, and I got into it, and they said the same thing. So I must be the line they teach in school. It all comes back to us. There are plenty. I got off the phone today with a guy, Reverend Lamont Granby, and we spoke this morning. And he was talking about he was going into a precinct and he was trying to encourage the cops because he feels that pain. That person will never end up on a television show. But the person who stands who is saying law enforcement is all bad. So that's why I tell law enforcement, don't fall for it, right? There are changes that have to be made. And you don't get the excuse, well, we know we have to make changes. No, make the changes. But also be clear that the overwhelming majority of the people out there support you. They understand that. And don't let the media manipulation or how you choose to get your message affect totally. If people did not support police, and I'm not saying just, well, I support them. I speak to people every day. They support the police. When they see what they're going out against them, they realize that is not the issue. That's not what they're calling for.
I'm curious. Much younger than you are now, okay, as 20-something-year-old young guys, would you want to be a cop right now, Phil?
I don't know if that's a yes or no for me, because I didn't, when I was 21, I didn't want to, I wasn't like I wake up in the morning and I wanted to be a police officer. It's a noble profession. It's a profession where you can affect people on a day-by-day basis and feel good about yourself. So whatever self-worth you put into that, the overwhelming majority of people do support you. But they are tough times now, some real, some imagined. And I don't know whether I would choose to now or not, but I do think that people who are choosing to be a police officer today, in 20 years, they're still going to be happy that they made that decision.
Anthony?
It's a tough question, I agree. I think for me personally, this job, I had 25 years with the NYPD. I had a very blessed career, and I had the great fortune to work for people such as Phil, great leaders. I paved my own way on the job, and I had a great career. I've done peer-reviewed research on motivations for why people go into policing, and I've broken it down by race and gender. Overwhelmingly, regardless of race or gender, people go into this profession primarily because they want to help other people. That's not going to change. So we're still going to get people to come into the profession, but with everything that's going on right now, I got to tell you, it's a hard sell.
All right. Guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation. And I'm going to bring you in now. You heard from two folks who know the subject better than anybody. I want your perspective. The crime rates are real, and I want to get your take as to why you think that is. Toll-free lines open right now. You see the number, 888-766-2428. Your reaction after this.